She held the letter in her trembling hands, reading the same 4 words over and over again. Your daughter is alive. But that was impossible. Maya had watched her daughter die in that hospital bed 3 years ago. She had buried her. She had mourned her. So why was there a photograph attached showing a little girl who looked exactly like Emma, standing in front of a compound that Maya recognized from her darkest nightmares? And why was the return address from a place that officially didn't exist? Maya Chen folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into her cargo pocket, her fingers brushing against the crimson star tattoo that had started all of this. The same tattoo that everyone at Fort Blackstone thought was just pretty decoration. The same tattoo that had cost her everything she'd ever loved. The same tattoo that might be the key to getting it all back. But first, she had to survive what was coming, because the men who had taken her daughter 7 years ago had just made their biggest mistake. They had found her. They saw the ink and rolled their eyes with the kind of casual dismissal reserved for things they couldn't understand. A crimson star on a soldier's forearm at a Tier 1 base, delicate and feminine against the harsh backdrop of military machinery. Surely a joke, they thought. Surely some misguided attempt at rebellion or romance. But they didn't know what it meant or where it came from. Not yet. They thought she was just a clerk, just another woman with a pretty face and a ridiculous tattoo, filing paperwork and counting supplies, while real soldiers did real work. They thought that right up until the moment a Delta Force commander walked into the supply depot, caught a glimpse of her arm, and rendered a salute so sharp and immediate that it could have cut glass. The desert wind howled across the scorching tarmac at Fort Blackstone, a classified U.S. military installation buried deep in the Nevada wasteland, where the government conducted operations that would never appear in any official record. The base existed in the gray space between acknowledged and denied, a place where America's most dangerous secrets went to hide from the world. Rows of armored vehicles sat baking under the relentless sun, their metal surfaces hot enough to fry an egg. The heat rose in shimmering waves that made everything look like a mirage, as if the entire base might disappear if you blinked too hard. Marines drilled in the distance, their voices carrying across the empty expanse as they shouted cadences that had been passed down through generations of warriors. The sound echoed off the concrete buildings and steel hangars, creating a symphony of military precision that never stopped, never slowed, never acknowledged the brutal temperature that could kill an unprepared soldier in hours. Fort Blackstone was home to approximately 3,000 military personnel, but only a fraction of them knew what really happened within its classified walls. Most were support staff, mechanics, cooks, and administrators who kept the base running while remaining blissfully unaware of the darker operations conducted in the restricted sections. They saw the black helicopters that came and went at odd hours, noticed the unmarked vehicles that arrived under cover of darkness, but they had learned not to ask questions about things that were none of their business, and moving unnoticed between these steel giants, invisible to the hundreds of soldiers who passed her every day, was a woman in desert camouflage with her sleeves rolled high and a tablet computer clutched in her weathered hands. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, 31 years old, Supply Division. The kind of soldier no one looked twice at, the kind who blended into the background like desert sand. Her black hair was pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it could have been painted on, not a single strand out of place despite the constant wind that plagued the Nevada desert. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, every crease sharp enough to cut paper, every button polished to a mirror shine that reflected the harsh sun. She stood 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 135 pounds, according to her official records. Her physical fitness scores were consistently above average, but never exceptional, good enough to meet standards without drawing attention. Her marksmanship qualification was listed as sharpshooter, respectable for a supply clerk, but nothing that would raise eyebrows or generate interest from the special operations community. Her boots were polished to a mirror shine that reflected the harsh Nevada sun, the leather so perfectly maintained that it looked like black glass. Her inventory reports were flawless, submitted precisely on time every single day for the past 18 months, every decimal point in its proper place, every item accounted for with the kind of obsessive attention to detail that made her superiors' jobs easier and kept her safely invisible. She carried no sidearm on her hip, no knife strapped to her leg, no visible weapons of any kind. Her hands were soft and uncalloused, the hands of someone who spent her days typing on keyboards and handling paperwork rather than gripping rifle stocks and rappelling ropes. She was stationed nowhere near active combat zones, assigned to the safest, most mundane duties the military had to offer. Her job was to count things, track things, and make sure other people had what they needed to do the real fighting. Maya's personal history, according to her service record, was unremarkable to the point of being boring. Born in San Francisco to immigrant parents who had worked their entire lives to give their daughter opportunities they had never had. Graduated from UC Berkeley with a degree in logistics management. Enlisted in the Army at 24, motivated by student loan debt and a desire to serve her country. Completed basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, with average scores across all categories. Advanced individual training at Fort Lee, where she learned the intricacies of military supply chain management. Her first assignment had been Fort Bragg, where she had spent 3 years processing equipment requests and maintaining inventory databases. Her performance evaluations were consistently positive, but never outstanding. She was described by her supervisors as reliable, thorough, and professional, the kind of bland praise that suggested competence without excellence. After Fort Bragg, she had requested a transfer to a more remote location, citing personal reasons that were never fully explained in her file. Fort Blackstone had been happy to accept her, always in need of qualified logistics personnel who could handle the unique challenges of a classified installation. And aside from one small visible detail, an intricately inked crimson star just above her left wrist, no bigger than a silver dollar, she was completely, utterly invisible. The tattoo was beautiful in its simplicity. 5 perfect points rendered in deep red ink, with delicate shading that made it seem to glow against her olive skin. At first glance, it looked like something a teenager might get on a dare, or perhaps a memorial to a lost love. The artwork was exquisite, clearly done by a master tattoo artist who understood how to make ink look like it was alive beneath the skin. The star seemed to pulse with its own inner light, the red so deep and rich that it appeared almost 3-dimensional. But there were details that most people missed. Tiny numbers etched in ink so fine they were barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. Coordinates that corresponded to a place that didn't exist on any official map. Below the star, in script so small it might have been mistaken for a shadow, were 2 letters, MW. The soldiers at Fort Blackstone had noticed the tattoo, of course. In a world of regulation haircuts and standardized uniforms, anything that stood out drew attention, and Maya's tattoo definitely stood out, a splash of color and femininity in an environment dominated by camouflage and steel. "She's got a star on her arm," Private Johnson had muttered to his buddy in the chow line just that morning, nodding toward Maya as she sat alone at a corner table, methodically eating her scrambled eggs while reviewing supply manifests on her tablet. Johnson was 19 years old, fresh out of basic training, with the kind of swagger that came from never having been truly tested. His uniform was still crisp and new, his boots still shiny, his confidence still intact. "What's she gonna do if we get attacked?" Johnson continued, loud enough for several nearby tables to hear. "Wish upon the enemy. Maybe she can blind them with all that sparkly ink." The laughter that followed was the kind of cruel, casual mockery that flourished in military environments, the kind that said more about the mockers than their target. Johnson's friend, Private Martinez, snorted into his coffee, nearly choking on the hot liquid. "Maybe she thinks it makes her look tough, like she's some kind of secret badass or something." "Yeah, right," Johnson replied, his voice carrying across the mess hall with the confidence of youth and ignorance. "I've seen more muscle on a yoga instructor. Bet she's never even fired her weapon outside of basic training. Probably closes her eyes when she pulls the trigger." Martinez nodded enthusiastically, eager to contribute to the mockery. "My sister has a butterfly tattoo. Same kind of thing, pretty, meaningless, and completely useless. At least butterflies are supposed to be delicate. A star. What's next? A rainbow? Maybe some unicorns?" The conversation was overheard by other soldiers, who added their own commentary and speculation. Maya became the subject of a running joke that spread through the enlisted ranks like wildfire. the supply clerk with the pretty tattoo who thought she was tougher than she looked, the desk jockey who had watched too many action movies and decided to play dress-up with symbols she didn't understand. Maya had ignored them, just as she ignored all the others. The whispered comments, the barely concealed smirks, the eye rolls when she walked past. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to tune out the noise, to focus on her work, while the world around her dissolved into irrelevance. It was a skill she had learned in places where distraction meant death, though none of the soldiers at Fort Blackstone would have believed that if she had told them. She moved through Fort Blackstone like a ghost, respected by the quartermaster staff who appreciated her efficiency and attention to detail, invisible to the brass who had more important things to worry about, and considered utterly forgettable by the Tier 1 operators who used her department for resupply. Delta Force, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, they all passed through her domain like ships in the night, taking what they needed and disappearing back into whatever shadows had spawned them. They looked through her as if she were made of glass, their eyes sliding past her face to focus on more important things. Equipment manifests, ammunition counts, mission timelines, gear specifications. Never her. Never the woman behind the desk who made it all possible. The special operations community was a small, insular world where reputation was everything, and recognition was earned through blood and sacrifice. These were men who had proven themselves in the world's most dangerous places, who had faced death and emerged victorious, who carried themselves with the quiet confidence that came from knowing they were among the best soldiers on the planet. To them, Maya was furniture, a necessary but unremarkable piece of the military machine that processed their requests and handed over their equipment without question or comment. They might nod politely when she verified their authorization codes, might even say thank you when she handed over their gear, but they never really saw her. She was background noise, as forgettable as the concrete walls and fluorescent lights that surrounded them. Maya had grown accustomed to the invisibility. In many ways she preferred it. Invisibility was safety. Invisibility was peace. Invisibility meant she could do her job without complications, without questions, without anyone digging too deeply into who she really was or where she had come from. But invisibility, like all good things, couldn't last forever. Wednesday started like any other day. Maya arrived at the supply depot at 05:30, a full hour before her shift officially began, because she had learned long ago that preparation was the difference between success and failure. The morning air was still cool, a brief respite before the desert sun turned the base into an oven. She unlocked the reinforced steel door with her personal access card, disabled the security system with her personal code, and began her morning routine. The supply depot was her domain, a warehouse-sized building filled with everything from toilet paper to night vision goggles. Row upon row of metal shelving stretched from floor to ceiling, each section carefully organized and meticulously labeled. Maya knew the location of every item, could navigate the maze of equipment in complete darkness if necessary. She had spent 18 months learning every inch of the space, memorizing not just what was stored where, but how long it took to retrieve each item, which routes were fastest, where the blind spots were. Inventory check, equipment status review, requisition processing. The same tasks she had performed every day for the past 18 months, executed with the kind of mechanical precision that came from years of military discipline. She moved through her checklist with robotic efficiency, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she updated databases and verified stock levels. She was halfway through updating the ammunition manifest when she heard the vehicles approaching. The deep rumble of diesel engines, multiple vehicles moving in formation. Maya glanced up from her computer screen and saw them through the reinforced window. A convoy of black SUVs with tinted windows rolling through the main gate like a funeral procession. The vehicles were unmarked but expensive, the kind of high-end tactical transport that cost more than most people made in a year. They moved with the coordinated precision of a military unit, maintaining perfect spacing and formation as they navigated the base's winding roads. Maya counted 6 vehicles in total, each one identical to the others, each one radiating the kind of menace that came from carrying very dangerous people to very dangerous places. Tier 1 operators. She could tell, just from the way the convoy moved, the way it commanded space and attention without making any obvious displays of force. There was a predatory grace to elite soldiers that was impossible to fake and impossible to miss once you knew what to look for. It was in the way they carried themselves, the way they moved through space, the way they seemed to own whatever environment they occupied. Maya watched the convoy approach through her window, noting details automatically. The lead vehicle was slightly larger than the others, probably carrying the unit commander. The spacing between vehicles was exactly what you would expect from a team that had trained together extensively. The route they were taking was the most direct path to the supply depot, which meant they were here for a resupply mission. 8 figures emerged from the SUVs, all in tactical gear that looked like it had been designed by science fiction writers and built by defense contractors with unlimited budgets. They were bearded and battle-scarred and silent, moving with the fluid coordination of a pack of wolves. These weren't regular military. These were the kind of men who operated in the spaces between countries, in the gray areas where official policy ended and necessary action began. The lead operator was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that came from never having lost a fight that mattered. His gear was pristine but well used, the mark of someone who took care of his equipment because his life depended on it. His rifle was slung across his chest, with the casual familiarity of someone who had carried weapons in combat zones for years. His movements were economical and precise, wasting no energy on unnecessary gestures or displays. Behind him, 7 other operators moved in a loose formation that spoke of countless hours of training and real-world experience. Each man was a specialist, Maya could tell, trained for specific roles within the team structure. The medic was identifiable by the extra pouches on his vest. The communications specialist carried additional radio equipment. The demolitions expert had the slightly bulkier profile that came from carrying explosives and detonation devices. They were here for a resupply, obviously, some kind of classified operation that required equipment she wasn't cleared to know about. Maya had processed dozens of similar requests over the past year and a half. The routine was always the same. They would present their authorization codes, she would verify their credentials against the classified database, and she would hand over whatever they needed without asking questions about where they were going or what they planned to do. Simple, clean, professional. No complications, no personal interactions, no reason for anyone to remember her face or wonder about her background. The lead operator pushed through the supply depot door with the kind of casual authority that suggested he owned whatever space he occupied. His eyes swept the room in a practiced threat assessment, cataloging exits and potential cover positions with the automatic paranoia of someone who had survived too many ambushes to ever truly relax. The scan took less than 3 seconds, but Maya knew he had memorized every detail of the room's layout. When his gaze finally settled on Maya, sitting behind her desk with her hands folded neatly in front of her, his expression shifted to something between amusement and disdain. She could see him categorizing her, filing her away as non-threat and irrelevant, with the kind of casual dismissal that elite soldiers reserved for civilians and support personnel. "You, the supply clerk?" he asked, his voice carrying the flat, emotionless tone of someone who had asked the same question 1,000 times before in 100 different locations. There was no hostility in his voice, but no warmth either. She was simply an obstacle to be navigated, a bureaucratic hurdle to be overcome as quickly and efficiently as possible. Maya looked up from her computer screen, meeting his eyes with the kind of steady calm that had taken her years to perfect. She had learned to project an image of competent blandness, the kind of unremarkable professionalism that made people forget her face the moment they looked away. "I'm the logistics officer of record," she replied, her voice soft, but carrying an undertone of steel that most people missed. "How can I assist you today?" The operator's smirk widened slightly, as if her response had confirmed something he already suspected. Maya could see him processing her words, noting the slight formality of her language, the way she held herself, the careful precision of her speech. But whatever conclusions he was drawing, they clearly weren't leading him toward any recognition of who she really was. "Didn't ask for your resume, Stargirl," he said, nodding toward the crimson tattoo on her wrist with the kind of casual mockery that suggested he had already forgotten her name, if he had ever bothered to learn it in the first place. Just need to know if you can count high enough to handle our requisition. Behind him, one of the younger operators, barely old enough to shave, let alone carry the kind of weapons he was sporting, chuckled with the cruel enthusiasm of someone trying to impress his superiors. Man, I've seen more muscle on a barista at Starbucks. You sure she can lift the equipment we need? The comment drew snickers from several other team members, the kind of casual cruelty that flourished in environments where strength was valued above all else and weakness was seen as a character flaw. Maya had heard variations of the same joke hundreds of times over the past 18 months, delivered by men who thought that muscles and attitude were substitutes for competence and intelligence. Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the old anger trying to claw its way to the surface like a caged animal sensing freedom. But she had learned long ago to bury that anger, to channel it into something more useful than rage. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a requisition form, sliding it across the metal surface toward the lead operator with the kind of mechanical efficiency that suggested she had performed the same action thousands of times before. "I'll need your authorization codes and mission parameters," she said, her voice remaining perfectly level despite the mockery echoing around the room. "Standard protocol for all Tier 1 requisitions." The operator glanced at the form, then back at Maya, his expression suggesting he was dealing with a particularly slow child who didn't understand the importance of what was happening. "Listen, sweetheart, we don't have time for your paperwork games. We need gear and we need it now. So why don't you just point us toward the good stuff and let the grown-ups handle the rest?" Maya's fingers tightened slightly on her pen, but her expression never changed. She had dealt with men like this before, men who thought that muscles and attitude were substitutes for competence and respect, men who had never learned that the most dangerous people were often the ones you never saw coming. Men who confused loudness with strength and arrogance with confidence. "I understand your urgency," she said carefully, her voice carrying the kind of professional patience that came from years of dealing with difficult customers. "But regulations require proper authorization for all equipment transfers. I'm sure you understand the importance of following protocol." The younger operator laughed again, louder this time, his voice carrying the kind of braying enthusiasm that suggested he thought he was being particularly clever. "Protocol? Lady, we are the protocol. We're the guys who go places and do things that don't officially exist. You think we're going to be stopped by some desk jockey with a pretty tattoo?" Maya was about to respond, her mouth opening to deliver the kind of polite but firm response that had served her well for 18 months, when something changed in the room's atmosphere. A shift so subtle that most people would have missed it entirely, like the moment before an earthquake when animals start acting strangely and birds fall silent. But Maya wasn't most people, and she had learned to read the signs that preceded violence, the way meteorologists read storm clouds. The air pressure seemed to change, becoming heavier and more oppressive. The casual chatter of the operators died away, replaced by a tension that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The last man stepped through the door. He was older than the others, maybe 50, with silver threading through his black hair like frost on winter grass. His face was weathered and scarred, marked by years of exposure to sun and wind, and things that left deeper marks than weather ever could. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into desert sun and Arctic snow, of scanning horizons for threats that might never come, but couldn't be ignored. His uniform was different from the others, more subdued, with patches that were designed to blend rather than stand out. But Maya recognized the subtle indicators of rank and authority, the small details that marked him as someone who had climbed the ladder of special operations through competence and survival, rather than politics and connections. This wasn't just another operator. This was a commander, someone who had earned his position by making the hard decisions that kept other people alive, someone who had learned to carry the weight of responsibility without letting it crush him. His eyes swept the room with the same automatic threat assessment as his subordinates, but when his gaze fell on Maya, something extraordinary happened. He froze. Not her face, not her uniform, not her posture or her expression, or any of the dozen other details that might have caught his attention. Her tattoo, the crimson star on her left wrist, visible where her sleeve had ridden up slightly as she reached for the requisition form. 5 perfect points rendered in deep red ink, with coordinates so small they were barely visible unless you knew exactly what to look for. Maya watched his face change, saw the moment of recognition hit him like a physical blow. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed as he focused on the details that others had missed. The tiny numbers, the almost invisible letters, the specific shade of red that couldn't be replicated by any civilian tattoo artist. The room went dead silent. Even the younger operators, who had been snickering and making jokes just moments before, seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted. The casual atmosphere of mockery and dismissal evaporated like water in the desert, replaced by something heavier and more dangerous. The commander straightened slowly, his eyes never leaving Maya's wrist, and then did something that no one in that room had expected. He saluted, not the casual, perfunctory gesture that soldiers exchanged as a matter of routine. This was a formal, precise salute, rendered with the kind of respect usually reserved for fallen heroes and Medal of Honor recipients. His hand snapped to his forehead with military precision, his back straight as a rifle barrel, his eyes locked on Maya's face with an intensity that made the air itself seem to vibrate. The salute was perfect in every detail, from the angle of his hand to the position of his feet. It was the kind of salute that spoke of decades of military tradition, of respect earned through blood and sacrifice, of recognition that transcended rank and protocol and the normal rules that governed military interaction. The other operators stared in confusion and growing alarm. Their commander, a man they had seen face down insurgents and terrorists without blinking, a man who had earned his position through competence and courage, was saluting a supply clerk, a woman they had been mocking just seconds before. "Sir?" the lead operator asked, his voice tight with bewilderment and the first stirrings of something that might have been fear. "Sir, what's happening?" But the commander didn't break his gaze, didn't drop his salute, didn't acknowledge the question or the confusion of his subordinates. He simply stood there, frozen in that position of respect, waiting. Maya hesitated for just a moment, her mind racing through possibilities and implications. She could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that whatever happened next would change everything. For 18 months she had been invisible, unremarkable, safe. For 18 months she had been able to hide in plain sight, to bury the part of herself that had once been something far more dangerous than a supply clerk. But recognition was a double-edged sword. It could validate her sacrifice, acknowledge her service, restore her to the community she had lost. Or it could destroy everything she had built, expose her to enemies who thought she was dead, put her in danger that she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The decision was made for her by muscle memory and military training that ran deeper than conscious thought. With the fluid grace of someone who had performed the gesture 10,000 times before, she returned the salute with military precision. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" the commander asked, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Maya nodded once, a sharp, economical movement that somehow conveyed both permission and warning. The commander leaned forward slightly, close enough that only she could hear his words. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of shared secrets and buried history, of operations that had never been officially acknowledged and sacrifices that would never be publicly honored. "You were at Crimson Dawn." 4 words, 12 letters, a sentence so simple that anyone overhearing it might have dismissed it as meaningless military jargon. But Maya felt those words hit her like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs and sending ice water through her veins. Every muscle in the room seemed to tighten simultaneously. The operators who had been mocking her just minutes before now stood frozen, their eyes darting between their commander and the woman they had dismissed as harmless. The crimson star tattoo on Maya's wrist suddenly seemed to pulse with its own light, as if the ink itself was alive and responding to the recognition. Because it wasn't just a design, it wasn't some pretty decoration chosen from a tattoo parlor wall. It was a symbol, coded, classified, and issued only to members of a top-secret joint operation that had been buried so deep in the black budget that most people with security clearances had never heard of it. Operation Crimson Dawn, a mission that had gone dark 7 years ago in the mountains of Afghanistan, leaving 37 operatives unaccounted for and presumed dead. A mission so classified that its very existence was denied by every government agency that might have been involved. The operation had been designed to eliminate a high-value target who had been coordinating attacks against American forces throughout the region. The target was protected by a private army of mercenaries and foreign fighters, hidden in a compound that was built like a fortress in terrain that made conventional assault nearly impossible. Crimson Dawn had been a joint operation involving the best operators from every branch of special operations. Delta Force, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, and a handful of specialists whose backgrounds were so classified that even their names were redacted from official records. 37 of America's most elite warriors sent into the mountains to eliminate a threat that conventional forces couldn't touch. The mission had gone wrong in ways that no one had anticipated. Intelligence failures, equipment malfunctions, enemy forces that were better prepared and more numerous than expected. What should have been a surgical strike had turned into a running battle that lasted for 3 days and nights, with American forces fighting their way through terrain that seemed designed to kill them. In the end, only 4 operators had made it to the extraction point. 4 out of 37. The rest were listed as missing in action, presumed killed, their bodies never recovered from the mountains that had become their tomb. Maya Chen was one of those 37 ghosts. And now, standing in a supply depot in the middle of the Nevada desert, she had been recognized by someone who knew exactly what that crimson star meant. How? The younger operator started to ask, then stopped, his voice trailing off as the implications began to sink in. How are you still active duty? But Maya didn't answer. She couldn't answer. Not here, not now. Not with so many ears listening and so many questions that couldn't be asked, let alone answered. Instead, she simply stood up from her desk, her movements careful and controlled, and walked toward the back of the supply depot. The commander remained at attention, his salute still sharp and unwavering, his eyes tracking her movement with the intensity of a predator watching prey. But there was no threat in his gaze, only recognition, only respect, only the acknowledgement of something that transcended rank and protocol and the normal rules that governed military interaction. She's not just active, he said quietly, his words meant for his team, but carrying clearly in the sudden silence. She's the reason half of Alpha Team made it home. The other operators didn't laugh anymore. They didn't make jokes about baristas or desk jockeys or pretty tattoos. They simply stood there, staring at the woman who had just been revealed as something far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. Maya reached the back wall of the supply depot and turned around, her expression as calm and unreadable as it had been when they first entered. But something had changed in her posture, in the way she held herself. The careful invisibility was gone, replaced by something harder and more focused. "Your requisition," she said, her voice carrying across the room with new authority. "I'll need those authorization codes now." The lead operator, who had been so confident and dismissive just minutes before, fumbled for his paperwork with hands that weren't quite steady. The younger operator, who had made jokes about her strength, was now staring at her with the wide-eyed fascination of someone who had just realized he was standing next to a live grenade. And the commander, still standing at attention, finally lowered his salute with the slow, deliberate movement of someone performing a sacred ritual. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying decades of military tradition and hard-earned respect. "It's an honor." Maya nodded once, accepting the acknowledgement without comment. Then she returned to her desk, sat down, and began processing their requisition as if nothing had happened. As if the last 5 minutes hadn't just turned her carefully constructed world upside down. But as she typed authorization codes and verified equipment lists, her mind was racing, because being recognized meant being remembered, and being remembered meant that the people who had tried to bury Operation Crimson Dawn might soon realize that not all of their ghosts were as dead as they had hoped. The next morning came like a slap to the face, harsh and unforgiving under the Nevada sun. Maya arrived at the mess hall at 600 sharp, still in her standard desert fatigues, still carrying herself with the same careful invisibility that had protected her for 18 months. But something had changed overnight, something subtle but unmistakable. Word had spread. In the military, secrets had a half-life measured in hours rather than days. By the time Maya walked through the mess hall doors, every soldier on base had heard some version of what had happened in the supply depot. The details varied depending on who was telling the story, but the core facts remained consistent. A Delta Force commander had saluted a supply clerk, and that clerk had a tattoo that meant something important. Maya could feel the weight of their stares as she moved through the chow line, selecting her usual breakfast of scrambled eggs and black coffee. Conversations died as she passed, replaced by whispered speculation and furtive glances. The casual dismissal of the previous day had been replaced by something more complex, a mixture of curiosity, respect, and fear that followed her like a shadow. She found her usual table in the corner, the one that faced the wall and offered a clear view of all the exits. It was a habit left over from darker days, when situational awareness was the difference between living and dying. Maya sat down with her back to the room and began eating with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else in her life. It would have been another day of silent endurance, if not for the photograph. Someone, she never found out who, had printed a blurry image of her tattoo and taped it near the mess hall entrance. Below the image, scrawled in red marker with the crude enthusiasm of a middle school bully, was a single word: poser. The photograph was grainy and poorly lit, obviously taken with a cell phone from across the room, but it was clear enough to show the Crimson Star in all its intricate detail, clear enough for anyone who cared to look, to see exactly what had caused such a stir the day before. A cluster of young recruits had gathered around the photograph, their voices carrying the kind of cruel laughter that flourished in environments where weakness was punished and conformity was rewarded. "Look at this shit," one of them was saying, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19 with the kind of swagger that came from never having been truly tested. "Little Miss Supply Clerk thinks she's some kind of secret agent." His friend, equally young and equally stupid, snorted with amusement. Probably got it done at some strip mall tattoo parlor. Thought it would make her look tough. "Yeah, right," the first recruit replied, loud enough for Maya to hear from across the room. "I bet she's never even seen combat. Probably thinks Call of Duty counts as military experience." Maya continued eating her eggs with mechanical precision, her expression never changing. She had heard worse, much worse, in places where words were the least dangerous things being thrown around. But the recruits weren't finished. Emboldened by their audience and their own perceived cleverness, they began to elaborate on their theory. The tattoo was fake, they decided, a desperate attempt by a lonely woman to seem more interesting than she really was. Maybe she had gotten it to impress a boyfriend. Maybe she thought it would help her fit in with the real soldiers. The laughter grew louder, more confident. Other soldiers began to gather around the photograph, adding their own commentary and speculation. Maya became the center of a growing storm of mockery and derision, all of it based on the assumption that she was exactly what she appeared to be, a harmless desk jockey with delusions of grandeur. They were still laughing when the two officers entered. Captain Rodriguez and Major Thompson were career soldiers, both of them with the kind of hard-earned credibility that came from decades of service in some of the military's most demanding roles. Rodriguez was a compact, muscular man with graying temples and scars on his hands that spoke of close-quarters combat. Thompson was taller and leaner, with the kind of predatory grace that marked him as someone who had spent serious time in special operations. Both men were known throughout Fort Blackstone for their uncompromising standards and their particular intolerance for anyone who hadn't earned their place through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. They were the kind of officers who could spot a fraud from across a room and who took personal offense at anyone who tried to claim honors they hadn't earned. When they saw the photograph taped to the wall, their expressions shifted to something between amusement and disgust. "Well, well," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the flat authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Looks like we've got ourselves a wannabe." Thompson stepped closer to the photograph, studying it with the kind of clinical attention he might have given to enemy intelligence. "Crimson Star," he said, his voice thoughtful. "That's supposed to be some kind of special operations thing, right? Black budget stuff?" "If it's real," Rodriguez replied with a snort, "which it obviously isn't. Real operators don't advertise their credentials with pretty tattoos. They sure as hell don't end up counting supplies in the middle of nowhere." The crowd around them had grown larger, drawn by the authority of the two officers and the promise of entertainment. Maya could feel their attention like a physical weight, pressing down on her from all sides. But she continued eating, her movements steady and controlled, giving no sign that she was aware of the growing spectacle. Thompson's voice rose slightly, ensuring that his words would carry across the mess hall. "You know what this is? This is stolen valor. Some clerk who watched too many movies and decided to play dress-up with symbols she doesn't understand. Probably got it off the internet," Rodriguez added, his tone growing more contemptuous. "Looked up cool military tattoos and picked the first thing that seemed impressive. Bet she tells people she's some kind of secret badass." The laughter that followed was different from the crude mockery of the recruits. This was the laughter of authority, of men whose opinions carried weight and whose judgment could make or break careers. It was the kind of laughter that said the joke was over and the target had been officially designated as fair game. Maya placed her fork down slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, but her hands remained perfectly still on the table. She had reached a decision point, the kind of moment that could change everything or leave things exactly as they were. For 18 months, she had chosen invisibility. For 18 months, she had endured the mockery and the dismissal and the casual cruelty of people who thought they knew who she was. For 18 months, she had buried the part of herself that had once been something far more dangerous than a supply clerk. But 18 months was long enough. Thompson approached her table with the confident stride of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He was carrying the photograph in his hand, holding it up like evidence in a court-martial. "This you, Sergeant?" he asked, his voice loud enough for the entire mess hall to hear. Maya looked up at him with eyes that were clear and steady and completely calm. She didn't speak, didn't defend herself, didn't offer explanations or excuses. She simply met his gaze with the kind of unwavering attention that made some primitive part of his brain start sending warning signals. Thompson stepped closer, encouraged by her silence and the attention of his audience. "You think putting that emblem on your skin makes you special, makes you one of them. You're wearing history you didn't earn, sweetheart. You're disrespecting every real operator who ever bled for that symbol." Still no response. Maya continued to look at him with that same steady calm, as if she were studying an interesting but ultimately harmless insect. Rodriguez moved to flank her, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a lecture to a particularly slow student. "Let me guess how this happened. Your boyfriend was Special Forces, maybe Delta, maybe SEALs. You thought his stories were romantic, thought his world was exciting. So you got yourself a little souvenir to remember him by." The mess hall had gone completely silent now. Every conversation had died, every fork had been set down, every eye was focused on the confrontation unfolding in the corner. Maya could feel the weight of their attention, the collective breath being held as they waited to see how she would respond. She stood up slowly, her back straight and her movements fluid. Her breakfast tray remained untouched on the table, the eggs growing cold as she faced the two officers, with the kind of calm that preceded either surrender or violence. "You've had your fun, gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Now let me speak with someone who knows what that emblem actually means." Then, for the first time since her arrival at Fort Blackstone, Maya Chen marched straight down the middle of the mess hall. Every soldier's fork paused mid-air. Every conversation died. Every eye followed her progress as she moved with the kind of purposeful stride that belonged to someone who had just stopped pretending to be something she wasn't. She didn't break step until she reached the door marked Operations Command. She knocked once, a sharp, authoritative sound that cut through the silence like a gunshot. A voice inside, rough and direct, called out, "Enter." Colonel James Morrison was a man who had earned his position through 3 decades of service in some of the military's most demanding roles. His office walls were covered with commendations and photographs that told the story of a career spent in the world's most dangerous places. His desk was organized with the kind of military precision that suggested a mind capable of managing complex operations under extreme pressure. He looked up from his paperwork as Maya entered, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to sharp attention as he took in her posture and bearing. This wasn't the same woman who had been processing supply requisitions for the past 18 months. This was someone else entirely. "Staff Sergeant Chen, sir," she said crisply, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made Morrison's eyebrows rise slightly, "requesting permission to clarify my service record." Morrison gestured for her to speak, his instincts telling him that whatever was about to happen was going to be significant. Maya reached into her cargo pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, placing it on his desk with the kind of careful precision that suggested it was more valuable than gold. The document was worn and creased, obviously carried for a long time. It was stamped with multiple security classifications, each one representing a different level of access and authority. Morrison opened it carefully, his expression growing more serious with each line he read. The first line made him blink hard. Operation Crimson Dawn redacted. The second line made him sit back in his chair. Operative code, Red Star 7, classification, Tier 1, designated marksman. The third line made him stand up. Commanding Officer, Latit. Colonel Marcus Webb, Delta Force. Status KIA operator. Status MIA, presumed KIA. Morrison read the document twice, then looked up at Maya with an expression that combined disbelief, recognition, and something that might have been awe. "This," he started, then stopped, his voice trailing off as the implications began to sink in. "This can't be accurate, Sergeant." Maya leaned forward slightly, her posture shifting to something more formal and more dangerous. "I was attached off books under JSOC's Deep Black Vector program, sir. Crimson Dawn was a joint operation targeting high-value assets in the Hindu Kush. I was the last operative extracted from the primary objective when the compound was compromised." She pulled back her sleeve to expose the full tattoo, and Morrison saw details he had missed before. The Crimson Star was surrounded by coordinates so small they were barely visible, numbers that corresponded to a place that didn't exist on any official map. Below the coordinates, in ink so faded it was almost invisible, were two letters, MW. Marcus Webb. Morrison had known him, had served with him on 3 separate deployments. Webb had been one of the finest officers he had ever encountered, a man who had earned the respect of every soldier who had served under him. Webb had died 7 years ago in Afghanistan, killed in action during an operation that had never been officially acknowledged. "That's the Red Star designation, sir," Maya continued, her voice steady and professional. "Only 4 operatives carried it during Crimson Dawn. The other 3 are buried in Arlington National Cemetery." Morrison didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood up slowly, walked around his desk, and did something that would be talked about at Fort Blackstone for years to come. He saluted. Not the casual gesture exchanged between soldiers of different ranks. This was a formal, precise salute, rendered with the kind of respect usually reserved for Medal of Honor recipients and fallen heroes. His hand snapped to his forehead with military precision, his back straight as a rifle barrel. His eyes locked on Maya's face with an intensity that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Through the open door, several personnel in the adjacent hallway witnessed the moment. Colonel Morrison, decorated veteran of countless operations, saluting a staff sergeant. The sight was so unprecedented, so completely outside the normal order of things, that it would spawn rumors and speculation for months. Maya returned the salute with the same crisp precision, her movements carrying the muscle memory of someone who had performed the gesture countless times in situations where protocol was the difference between order and chaos. "Ma'am," Morrison said, his voice carrying decades of military tradition and hard-earned respect. "It's an honor to finally meet you properly." Maya nodded once, accepting the acknowledgement without comment. Then she turned and walked toward the door, her mission accomplished and her point made. But as she reached for the door handle, Morrison spoke again. "Sergeant," he said, his voice stopping her in her tracks, "why now? You've been here 18 months. Why reveal yourself now?" Maya turned back to face him, and for just a moment her carefully controlled expression cracked slightly. Morrison saw something in her eyes that he recognized from his own mirror, the look of someone who had been carrying a burden for too long. "Because, sir," she said quietly, "some things are worth fighting for, and some people need to be reminded that the dead don't always stay buried." Then she was gone, leaving Morrison alone with his thoughts and a classified document that officially didn't exist. When Maya reappeared in the mess hall, everything had changed. The photograph was gone, torn down by someone who had suddenly realized that mocking it might not be the wisest course of action. Thompson and Rodriguez were standing at rigid attention near the coffee station, their faces pale and their earlier confidence completely evaporated. The recruits who had been laughing and making jokes were now silent. their eyes wide with the kind of fear that came from realizing they had been playing with something far more dangerous than they had imagined. The entire mess hall had taken on the atmosphere of a church, hushed and reverent and filled with the weight of something sacred. Maya walked past all of them without a word, her expression as calm and unreadable as it had been when she first entered. But the silence she left behind was louder than all their previous laughter, filled with questions that couldn't be asked and answers that couldn't be given. One soldier, a sergeant with multiple deployment patches on his sleeve, whispered to his companion, "She's Red Star 7. Jesus Christ, she's actually Red Star 7. Another voice, barely audible, added, "That operation was a ghost story. I thought it was just legend." But Maya didn't acknowledge the whispers or the stares. She simply returned to her duties at the supply depot, carrying herself with the same careful invisibility that had protected her for 18 months. The only difference was that now, when soldiers passed by her window, they saluted first. And she, the one they had once laughed at, sometimes didn't even acknowledge them, because she had never been there for recognition or respect, or the approval of people who couldn't understand what she had sacrificed. She was there for something else entirely, something that was about to make itself known in the worst possible way. The letter had arrived that morning, slipped under her barracks door while she slept. No postmark, no return address, just her name written in handwriting she recognized, but had hoped never to see again. Inside, 4 words that changed everything. "Your daughter is alive." Maya had stared at those words for a long time, her hands trembling as she held the paper. Emma had died 3 years ago in a hospital bed, her small body finally succumbing to the cancer that had been eating her alive. Maya had held her hand as she passed, had felt the last breath leave her lungs, had buried her in a small cemetery outside of Denver, but attached to the letter was a photograph. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, with Maya's dark hair and Marcus Webb's green eyes. She was standing in front of a compound that Maya recognized from her nightmares, a place that officially didn't exist in a country that denied any American presence. The return address was from a ghost, someone who should have been dead, someone who had been presumed killed in action 7 years ago during Operation Crimson Dawn. Someone who knew exactly what the Crimson Star tattoo meant and why Maya had been hiding in plain sight for 18 months. They had found her. After all this time, after all her careful preparation and patient waiting, they had found her. And they had taken the one thing that mattered more to her than her own life. Maya folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into her cargo pocket, her mind already shifting into the kind of tactical thinking that had kept her alive in places where survival was measured in seconds rather than years. She had a choice to make. She could continue hiding, continue pretending to be nothing more than a supply clerk with a pretty tattoo. Or she could become what she had once been, what she had tried so hard to leave behind. The choice was made for her at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning, when the first explosion shattered the pre-dawn stillness. Then came the second blast, then a third. The entire base jolted awake as communications crackled to life with fragmented, panicked commands. "Possible breach on the northern perimeter. No visual confirmation. Repeat, no visual. We have inbound unknowns from multiple vectors. Sir, radar isn't picking up anything. How the hell?" And then the blackout hit. Every light on the eastern power grid died in a synchronized blink. Security cameras went dark. Perimeter sensors froze mid-scan. Emergency lighting failed to activate. The entire base was plunged into chaos and darkness, except for one place, one small section that still had power, Supply Depot Charlie, the southernmost checkpoint, where Maya Chen stood with her M4 carbine in hand. She didn't flinch or panic. She didn't call for backup or shout orders. Instead, she slowly removed her radio earpiece, now filled with static and confused chatter, and scanned the horizon with the practiced eye of someone who had done this before, in places where backup never came. Her breathing didn't quicken. Her hands didn't shake, but her eyes narrowed as she spotted movement in the distance, low, silent, and completely wrong. 6 black figures dropped from a stealth helicopter that appeared and disappeared like a shadow. They hit the ground running, moving with the fluid precision of elite operators. No call signs, no identifying marks, no lights. Maya flicked the safety off her rifle and activated the silent alarm on her belt. the one connected directly to the hardened circuit that bypassed base power. Nothing. The line was dead. That was it then. No backup, no cameras, no command structure. Just her and them. The first intruder reached the outer fence and cut through it like tissue paper with some kind of advanced cutting tool. Maya fired once, center mass. He dropped instantly, his body armor no match for her precision. 5 left. They hesitated for just a moment, just long enough for her to reposition behind the concrete blast barrier. The second attacker threw a flashbang grenade. Maya closed her eyes, turned away, and counted to 3. Then she popped up and fired twice more. One target spun sideways and collapsed. Another went down hard, clutching his leg and crawling for cover. The remaining 3 scattered, moving with the kind of tactical awareness that told Maya these weren't ordinary terrorists or insurgents. These were professionals, possibly military, definitely dangerous. Maya vaulted over the barrier, moving low and fast. Her movements weren't standard infantry tactics. They were surgical, fluid, and completely silent. The kind of movement patterns taught only in the deepest black operations, where noise meant death and hesitation meant failure. By the time the 4th intruder reached the secondary checkpoint tower, she was already behind him. A single command stopped him in his tracks. "On your knees, now." He turned slowly, raising his weapon. Too late. Maya's shot was muffled, precise, and final. He collapsed without making a sound. The 5th attacker tried to flank her position, moving through the vehicle maintenance bay. Maya tracked him through the shadows, her night vision training kicking in automatically. When he emerged near the fuel depot, she was waiting. 1 shot. Clean kill. The last intruder was the smartest. He'd taken cover behind an armored vehicle and was trying to call for extraction on what looked like a satellite communication device. Maya couldn't let that happen. She moved in a wide circle, using the terrain and abandoned equipment for concealment, her footsteps silent on the concrete despite her boots. When she finally had a clear shot, she took it. The device exploded in his hands, sparks flying in the darkness, and he went down screaming. Maya approached carefully, weapon trained on his position, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. He was still alive but badly wounded, clutching his mangled hand against his chest. Blood seeped through his tactical vest where shrapnel had found gaps in his armor. When he looked up at her, his eyes were filled with pain and something that might have been surprise. You're not supposed to be here," he gasped, his voice thick with a foreign accent that Maya couldn't quite place. "Intel said this sector was unmanned after Uro 300. "Intel was wrong," Maya replied, her voice calm and professional despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Who sent you?" But before he could answer, the sound of approaching vehicles filled the air. Diesel engines roaring to life, the squeal of tires on asphalt, the distinctive whine of military vehicles moving at high speed. Backup was finally arriving, but Maya knew it was too late for answers. The wounded intruder's eyes rolled back and he went limp. Whether from blood loss or something else, Maya couldn't tell. She checked his pulse, weak but steady, then began searching his gear for identification or intelligence. APCs rolled into the checkpoint area with spotlights blazing, their beams cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Soldiers poured out of the vehicles, shouting orders and establishing a perimeter with the kind of controlled chaos that marked professional military response. Colonel Morrison was among the first on foot, sidearm drawn and ready, his face grim in the harsh artificial light. When he reached Supply Depot, Charlie and saw the scene before him, he stopped cold. 6 bodies scattered across the checkpoint area, spent brass casings glinting in the spotlight beams, scorch marks on the concrete where the communication device had exploded, and one woman standing in the center of it all, blood on her sleeve but not her own, her rifle held with the casual competence of someone who had done this before. Maya looked up as Morrison approached, her expression as calm as if she'd just finished routine inventory. The transformation was complete now. The careful invisibility was gone, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. "Report," Morrison barked, his voice carrying the authority of command. 6 hostiles bypassed perimeter security, using EMP devices to disable our detection grid, Maya said matter-of-factly, her voice steady despite what she'd just been through. They landed here believing this sector was unmanned, all threats neutralized. Alone? Morrison's voice carried a mixture of disbelief and awe. She nodded once. No time to wait for backup, sir. They were moving toward the main compound with what appeared to be demolition charges. Morrison looked around at the carnage, then back at Maya. In the harsh spotlight, he could see details he'd missed before. The way she held her weapon, the economical precision of her movements, the complete absence of shock or trauma that would have affected any normal soldier after such an encounter. "You didn't just stop them, Sergeant," he said quietly. "You ended it before it began." Another voice spoke from behind them, and Maya felt her blood turn to ice. General Patricia Hawthorne had arrived, her face pale in the emergency lighting, her eyes fixed on the scene with the kind of intensity that suggested she understood exactly what had happened here. "That tattoo," the general muttered, staring at Maya's exposed forearm where the crimson star seemed to pulse with its own light. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a promise. Word spread through Fort Blackstone like wildfire. 6 Black Ops infiltrators neutralized by one woman before the base had even fully mobilized. Intelligence would later confirm they were part of a rogue paramilitary organization testing vulnerabilities at U.S. installations worldwide. But Maya suspected the truth was far more personal. No one had expected resistance at the supply depot. Certainly not from a logistics sergeant, certainly not from her. But that was exactly why they had chosen this approach, because Maya Chen was supposed to be dead, buried in the mountains of Afghanistan 7 years ago, along with the rest of Operation Crimson Dawn. Someone had made a mistake. Someone had let slip that Red Star 7 was still alive, still breathing, still dangerous, and now that someone was going to pay for that mistake. In the days that followed, Maya was offered medals, promotions, and a full reactivation of her Red Star clearance with honors. She declined most of it, but she accepted one thing: the right to remain exactly where she was, at the edge of the base, watching and guarding the place everyone forgot, until she reminded them why it mattered. But Maya's mind was elsewhere. The letter in her pocket seemed to burn against her skin, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Emma was alive. Somehow, impossibly, her daughter was alive. And the people who had taken her were the same ones who had tried to bury Operation Crimson Dawn, the same ones who thought all the witnesses were dead. They were wrong, and Maya was going to show them exactly how wrong they were. The tattoo on her wrist had never been just decoration. It had never been a memorial or a fashion statement or any of the things people had assumed. It was a promise, written in crimson ink and sealed with blood. A promise that some debts could never be forgiven, some crimes could never be forgotten, and some people would never stop hunting until justice was served. Maya Chen had spent 18 months hiding in plain sight, playing the role of a harmless supply clerk, while she waited for the right moment. That moment had finally come. The people who had destroyed her life, who had killed her teammates, who had taken her daughter, had just made the fatal mistake of reminding her that she was still alive. They had awakened something that should have stayed buried, something that had been forged in the mountains of Afghanistan, and tempered by years of loss and grief and carefully controlled rage. Something that wore the face of a supply clerk, but carried the soul of a predator. The Crimson Star wasn't just ink on skin. It was a declaration of war written in a language that only the dead could truly understand. And Maya Chen was about to teach her enemies that some ghosts were far more dangerous than the living. As she stood in the aftermath of the attack, surrounded by the bodies of men who had underestimated her, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not satisfaction, not relief, but a cold, crystalline clarity that cut through all the noise and confusion and doubt. She knew who she was again. She knew what she was capable of. And most importantly, she knew what she had to do. The hunt was about to begin. And this time Maya Chen wasn't going to hide. The next morning brought visitors that Maya had been expecting, but dreading. 3 black SUVs arrived at Fort Blackstone just after dawn, their occupants moving with the kind of purposeful efficiency that marked them as federal agents. They wore dark suits despite the desert heat, their faces hidden behind sunglasses that reflected the harsh Nevada sun. Maya watched them from her office window as they made their way to the command building. She recognized the type. Intelligence operatives, probably CIA or NSA, here to clean up the mess and ask uncomfortable questions about how a supply clerk had managed to single-handedly eliminate a team of professional killers. Colonel Morrison appeared at her door an hour later, his expression grim. "They want to see you," he said simply. Maya nodded, having expected this moment since the first shot was fired. She followed Morrison to a conference room that had been hastily converted into an interrogation chamber. The three agents sat on one side of a metal table, their files and recording equipment arranged with bureaucratic precision. The lead agent was a woman in her 40s with steel-grey hair and eyes that missed nothing. She introduced herself as Agent Sarah Collins, though Maya suspected that wasn't her real name. The other two agents remained silent, their role apparently limited to observation and intimidation. "Staff Sergeant Chen," Collins began, her voice carrying the flat authority of someone accustomed to getting answers. "We need to discuss what happened here last night." Maya sat down across from them, her posture relaxed but alert. "I filed a complete report with Colonel Morrison. 6 hostiles attempted to breach the perimeter. I neutralized the threat." "Yes, we've read your report," Collins replied, opening a thick file folder. "What we're interested in is how a supply clerk managed to accomplish what should have required an entire security team." Maya met her gaze steadily. "I followed my training." "What training would that be?" Collins asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. "According to your official record, you're a logistics specialist with no combat experience beyond basic training." "My official record is accurate," Maya said carefully. Collins smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Is it? Because we've been doing some digging, Sergeant Chen, and we've found some very interesting discrepancies." She pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table. It showed Maya's tattoo in sharp detail, every line and shadow clearly visible. "This symbol. We know what it means." Maya looked at the photograph without expression. "It's a star." "It's a Red Star designation," Collins corrected. "Specifically Red Star 7, from an operation that officially never happened." The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Maya could feel the weight of their attention, the careful calculation behind their questions. These people knew exactly who she was. The question was what they planned to do about it. "Operation Crimson Dawn was classified at the highest levels," Collins continued. "Everyone involved was sworn to secrecy. Everyone who survived, that is." "I don't know what you're talking about," Maya replied, her voice steady. Collins leaned forward. "We know you were there, Sergeant. We know what you did. What we don't know is why you're here hiding in plain sight, pretending to be something you're not." Maya remained silent, her training kicking in automatically. Never volunteer information, never confirm what they think they know. Never give them anything they can use against you. "Let me tell you what we think happened," Collins said, settling back in her chair. 7 years ago, you were part of a classified operation that went wrong. Very wrong. Most of your team died, but somehow you survived. Instead of coming home to a hero's welcome, you disappeared, changed your identity, buried yourself so deep that even we had trouble finding you. She paused, studying Maya's face for any reaction. "The question is why? What are you hiding from? What are you afraid of?" Maya finally spoke, her voice quiet but carrying an undertone of steel. "I'm not afraid of anything." "No?" Collins pulled out another photograph, this one showing a young girl with dark hair and green eyes. Maya's breath caught in her throat, but she managed to keep her expression neutral. "Then why haven't you tried to find your daughter?" The words hit Maya like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain calm. "My daughter is dead." "Is she?" Collins asked. "Because our intelligence suggests otherwise. We have reason to believe that Maya Chen is alive and being held by the same people who tried to eliminate your team 7 years ago." Maya's hands clenched into fists beneath the table, but her voice remained steady. "You're lying." "Am I?" Collins slid another photograph across the table. This one showed Emma, older now but unmistakably her daughter, standing in what looked like a school playground. This was taken 3 weeks ago. Maya stared at the photograph, her mind racing. If Emma was alive, if she had been alive all this time, then everything Maya had believed about her daughter's death was a lie. The cancer, the hospital, the funeral, all of it had been an elaborate deception designed to keep Maya from looking for her. "Who has her?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Collins smiled again, and this time there was genuine satisfaction in it. The same people who sent those men to kill you last night. The same people who have been hunting the survivors of Crimson Dawn for 7 years. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Maya's face. They call themselves the Consortium, a private military organization with connections to several foreign governments. They were the ones protecting the target you were sent to eliminate. When your operation failed, they decided to tie up loose ends. Maya felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. The intelligence failures that had doomed Crimson Dawn, the enemy forces that had been waiting for them, the convenient timing of Emma's supposed illness. It had all been orchestrated, all part of a plan to eliminate everyone who knew the truth about what had really happened in those mountains. "What do you want from me?" Maya asked. "Your help," Collins replied. "We've been tracking the Consortium for years, but they're ghosts. They operate in the shadows, using shell companies and cutouts to hide their activities. We need someone who can get close to them, someone they think is dead." Maya understood now. The attack on Fort Blackstone hadn't been random. It had been a test, a way to confirm that Red Star 7 was still alive and still dangerous. The federal agents hadn't come to arrest her. They had come to recruit her. "You want me to go after them," Maya said. "We want you to get your daughter back," Collins corrected. "And in the process, help us destroy an organization that has been responsible for the deaths of dozens of American operatives." Maya stared at the photograph of Emma, her heart aching with a mixture of hope and rage. Her daughter was alive. After 3 years of grief and guilt and carefully controlled despair, Emma was alive. But she was in the hands of the people who had destroyed Maya's life, who had killed her teammates, who had made her believe her own child was dead. "What's the plan?" Maya asked. Collins smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "First, we're going to make sure everyone believes you're dead. Again. The attack last night provides the perfect cover. A heroic supply clerk killed in the line of duty, her body too damaged to recover." She pulled out a new set of documents and slid them across the table. "Then, you're going to become someone else, someone with the skills and background to infiltrate the Consortium's operations." Maya looked at the documents, a new identity, complete with background and credentials that would pass any scrutiny. The name on the passport was Sarah Mitchell, and according to her file, she was a former military contractor with experience in private security. "The Consortium recruits from the Special Operations community," Collins explained. "They look for people with the right skills and the wrong reasons, people who are angry, disillusioned, willing to work outside the law for the right price." "And you think I can convince them I'm one of those people?" "I think you can convince them of anything you need to," Collins replied. "The question is whether you're willing to do what it takes to get your daughter back." Maya looked at the photograph of Emma one more time, memorizing every detail of her daughter's face. Then she looked up at Collins, and the federal agent saw something in her eyes that made her lean back slightly. "I'll do whatever it takes," Maya said, her voice carrying a promise that was written in blood and sealed with steel. "But when this is over, when Emma is safe, I want the Consortium destroyed, completely. No survivors, no loose ends, no possibility of them ever hurting anyone else." Collins nodded slowly. "That's exactly what we had in mind." Maya stood up, her decision made. The supply clerk was dead, killed in a heroic last stand against overwhelming odds. What emerged from that death would be something far more dangerous. A ghost with a mission, a mother with nothing left to lose, and a soldier with a debt to collect. The crimson star on her wrist seemed to pulse with renewed life as Maya walked out of the conference room. The hunt was about to begin, and this time she wasn't going to stop until every last member of the Consortium was buried in the ground where they belonged. Emma was alive, and Maya Chen was coming to bring her home. 3 months later, Sarah Mitchell walked into a bar in Prague, her appearance carefully crafted to attract the right kind of attention. Her hair was shorter now, dyed blonde, and she carried herself with the kind of casual confidence that marked her as someone who had seen combat and lived to tell about it. The bar was the kind of place where questions weren't asked and conversations weren't overheard. Mercenaries, arms dealers, and other members of the shadow economy gathered here to conduct business that couldn't be done in the light of day. Maya had spent weeks establishing her cover identity, taking contracts with legitimate private security firms to build a reputation and create a paper trail. Sarah Mitchell was known in certain circles as a reliable operator who could handle delicate situations with minimal fuss and maximum efficiency. Tonight, she was here to meet a man named Viktor Kozlov, a Russian arms dealer who supposedly had connections to the consortium. It had taken months of careful networking and strategic introductions to get this meeting, and Maya knew she would only get one chance to make the right impression. Kozlov was sitting in a corner booth, his back to the wall and his eyes constantly scanning the room. He was a small, nervous man with thinning hair and the kind of pale complexion that came from spending too much time indoors. But Maya knew better than to underestimate him. Men like Kozlov survived in this business by being smarter and more ruthless than they appeared. "Ms. Mitchell," Kozlov said as she approached, his English heavily accented but precise, "please, sit. I have heard interesting things about your work." Maya slid into the booth across from him, her movements casual but alert. "All good things, I hope." "Indeed. The situation in Mogadishu, for instance. Very impressive. Very clean." Maya nodded, remembering the cover story she had carefully constructed. Sarah Mitchell had supposedly eliminated a warlord who had been interfering with humanitarian aid shipments, making it look like an accident, while ensuring that the aid could flow freely to those who needed it. "I believe in getting results," Maya said simply. Kozlov smiled, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. "Yes, I can see that, which is why I think you might be interested in a particular opportunity that has come to my attention." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "There is an organization that is always looking for people with your particular skills. They pay very well, and they ask very few questions about one's past." "What kind of organization?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. "The kind that operates in the spaces between governments," Kozlov replied. "The kind that handles problems that official channels cannot address. They call themselves the consortium." Maya felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her expression neutral. "I've heard rumors. Private military, very exclusive." "More than that," Kozlov said. "They are, how do you say, a full-service organization. Security, intelligence, logistics, elimination, whatever their clients need, they provide." "Sounds expensive." "Very. But also very profitable for those who work for them." Kozlov pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. "If you are interested, there is a man in Istanbul who handles recruitment. His name is Hassan al-Rashid." Maya picked up the card, noting the expensive paper and subtle watermark. "What makes you think they'd be interested in me?" "Because they are looking for someone with your specific background," Kozlov replied. "Someone with special operations experience who has reason to distrust official channels. Someone who has been, how do you say, burned by their own government." Maya understood. The consortium wasn't just looking for skilled operators. They were looking for people with grudges, people who could be motivated by revenge as much as money. People like the fictional Sarah Mitchell, who had supposedly been abandoned by her government after a mission went wrong. "I'll think about it," Maya said, pocketing the card. "Do not think too long," Kozlov warned. "Opportunities like this do not come often, and the consortium does not like to be kept waiting." Maya left the bar an hour later, her mind already working on the next phase of her plan. She had made contact with the consortium's recruitment network, but getting inside would require more than just a recommendation from an arms dealer. She would need to prove herself, to demonstrate that she was exactly the kind of person they were looking for. 2 weeks later, she was on a plane to Istanbul, carrying a new set of credentials and a carefully crafted backstory that would pass any background check. Sarah Mitchell was about to disappear into the shadow world of private military contractors, and when she emerged, she would be one step closer to finding her daughter. The crimson star tattoo was hidden now, covered by makeup and clothing, but Maya could feel it burning against her skin like a brand. It was a reminder of who she really was, of the promise she had made, and of the debt that still needed to be paid. Emma was out there somewhere, waiting to be rescued. And Maya Chen, now Sarah Mitchell, was coming to bring her home no matter what the cost. The hunt had begun in earnest, and this time there would be no mercy for those who stood in her way. The Crimson Star. Final chapter. Istanbul's ancient streets buzzed with the energy of a city caught between worlds. where East met West and shadows held secrets that could topple governments. Maya walked through the Grand Bazaar, her blonde hair catching the filtered sunlight that streamed through the market's ancient roof. She had been Sarah Mitchell for 3 weeks now, and the identity fit her like a second skin. Hassan al-Rashid's office was located above a carpet shop in one of the bazaar's quieter sections. Maya climbed the narrow stairs, noting the security cameras and the subtle bulge of weapons beneath the loose clothing of the men who lounged near the entrance. The consortium took their recruitment seriously. Al-Rashid was a thin man with intelligent eyes and the kind of careful mannerisms that suggested he had survived in a dangerous business by never making careless mistakes. His office was spartanly furnished but expensive, with a view of the Bosphorus that probably cost more than most people made in a year. "Ms. Mitchell," he said in accented English, gesturing for her to sit. "Viktor Kozlov speaks very highly of your work." "I get results," Maya replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Indeed, but the consortium requires more than just competence. We require commitment, loyalty, the ability to operate without the moral constraints that limit conventional military forces." Maya met his gaze steadily. "My government left me to die in Somalia. My team was abandoned because the mission became politically inconvenient. I learned that loyalty is a luxury I can't afford." Al-Rashid nodded approvingly. "Good. Anger is useful, but controlled anger is invaluable. Tell me, what do you know about our organization? I know you handle problems that governments can't officially address. I know you pay well and ask few questions. Beyond that, I assume I'll learn what I need to know if you decide I'm worth the investment." "Pragmatic. I like that." Al-Rashid opened a file on his desk. "We have a position available that might suit your particular skills. A security detail for one of our special facilities. The work is not glamorous, but it pays exceptionally well." Maya's pulse quickened. A special facility could be where they were holding Emma. "What kind of facility?" "The kind where discretion is more valuable than courage," Al-Rashid replied. "Are you interested?" "Depends on the terms." Al-Rashid smiled. "Direct. I appreciate that. The position pays $50,000 per month, plus bonuses for exceptional performance. The assignment is long-term, minimum 1-year commitment. And Ms. Mitchell, once you accept, there is no resignation, only successful completion or termination." Maya understood the threat implicit in his words. The consortium didn't let people walk away with their secrets, but that was exactly what she was counting on. They would only put her in a position where she could access sensitive information if they believed she was completely committed. "I accept," she said. Al-Rashid's smile widened. "Excellent. There is, however, one final test. A demonstration of your capabilities and your flexibility regarding moral constraints." He slid a photograph across the desk. It showed a middle-aged man in an expensive suit standing outside what looked like a government building. "This is Dr. Alexei Petrov, a Russian scientist who has been selling information to our competitors. We need him eliminated, but it must look like an accident. You have 48 hours. Maya studied the photograph, her mind already working on the tactical problem. "Where can I find him?" "He's staying at the Four Seasons, room 1247. He has a weakness for young women and expensive wine. Beyond that, the method is up to you." Maya pocketed the photograph. "Consider it done." 46 hours later, Dr. Alexei Petrov was found dead in his hotel room, apparently the victim of a heart attack, brought on by a combination of alcohol and a rare shellfish allergy that had somehow been triggered despite the fact that he hadn't eaten seafood in days. The Istanbul police ruled it death by natural causes, and Maya received a text message with coordinates and a time. The coordinates led to a private airfield outside the city, where a sleek corporate jet waited on the tarmac. Al-Rashid was there to see her off, his expression pleased but unsurprised. "Very clean work," he said, as they walked toward the aircraft. "Dr. Petrov's death will send exactly the right message to others who might consider betraying us." "Where am I going?" Maya asked. "Somewhere that doesn't exist on any map," Al-Rashid replied. "Welcome to the consortium, Ms. Mitchell." The flight took 18 hours with 2 refueling stops, and Maya spent the time studying the briefing materials she had been given. The facility she was being assigned to was called Site 7, and according to the files, it was a research and development center focused on advanced interrogation techniques and behavioral modification. Maya felt sick as she read between the lines. Site 7 was where the consortium conducted human experiments, testing new methods of torture and brainwashing on prisoners who had been disappeared from around the world. If Emma was being held anywhere, it would be here. The plane landed on a remote airstrip carved out of what looked like African savanna. Maya could see a cluster of buildings in the distance, surrounded by high walls and guard towers. The facility looked like a cross between a prison and a research laboratory, all concrete and steel and razor wire. A convoy of armored vehicles was waiting to transport her to the facility. The ride took 20 minutes across terrain that was deliberately kept clear of any cover or concealment. Maya noted the defensive positions, the kill zones, the overlapping fields of fire that would make any rescue attempt a nightmare. Site 7 was even more imposing up close. The walls were 30 feet high and topped with electrified wire. Guard towers were positioned every 100 meters, each one manned by operators with sniper rifles and night vision equipment. The main gate was a steel barrier that looked like it could stop a tank. Maya was processed through security with military efficiency. Her weapons and personal effects were confiscated. Her biometrics were recorded, and she was issued a uniform and identification badge that would track her movements throughout the facility. Her handler was a woman named Dr. Elizabeth Kane, a cold-eyed blonde who looked like she had stepped out of a Nazi propaganda poster. Kane gave Maya a tour of the facility, explaining the security protocols and her duties, with the kind of clinical detachment that suggested she had given this briefing many times before. "Your primary responsibility is perimeter security," Kane explained, as they walked through corridors lined with reinforced doors. "The subjects in this facility are extremely valuable, and their security is paramount." "What kind of subjects?" Maya asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Various types. Political prisoners, captured operatives, individuals with specialized knowledge that our clients require. The specifics are not your concern." They passed a corridor that was marked with additional security warnings, and Maya caught a glimpse of what lay beyond. Cells, dozens of them, each one containing a human being who had been reduced to a number and a file folder. "The children's wing is off-limits to security personnel," Kane said, noticing Maya's interest. "That section requires special clearance." Maya's blood turned to ice. Children's wing. Emma was here, somewhere behind those reinforced doors, and Maya was so close she could almost feel her daughter's presence. "I understand," Maya said, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. Kane led her to the security barracks, where Maya was assigned a bunk and introduced to the other guards. They were a mix of former military and career criminals, united by their willingness to do anything for money and their complete lack of moral constraints. Maya spent the next 2 weeks learning the facility's routines and security protocols. She worked 12-hour shifts, patrolling the perimeter and monitoring the guard towers. She ate meals with killers and torturers, who bragged about their work with the casual indifference of factory workers discussing production quotas. And every night, she lay in her bunk and planned. The children's wing was located in the facility's most secure section, accessible only through a series of checkpoints that required biometric identification and special authorization codes. Maya observed the patterns, noting which guards had access and when the security rotations changed. Dr. Kane visited the children's wing every Tuesday and Friday at 1400 hours. She always carried a tablet computer and a briefcase, and she always spent exactly 90 minutes inside before returning to her office. Maya began timing her own patrol routes to coincide with Kane's visits, gradually mapping the security procedures. On her third Friday, Maya made her move. She had spent days preparing, using her access to the security systems to create a window of opportunity. At 13:55 hours, she triggered a minor malfunction in the perimeter sensors that would require immediate attention from the guard towers. At 13:58, she activated a fire suppression system in the main laboratory that would draw additional security personnel away from the children's wing. At 1400 hours, as Dr. Kane entered the restricted section, Maya was already inside. The children's wing was a nightmare made real. Dozens of cells lined the corridors, each one containing a child who had been stolen from their families and subjected to unspeakable horrors. Maya moved through the section like a ghost, her heart breaking with every face she saw. She found Emma in cell C47. Her daughter was sitting on a narrow cot, staring at the wall with the kind of vacant expression that spoke of psychological trauma beyond imagination. She was thin and pale, her dark hair hanging limp around her face. But she was alive. After 3 years of believing her daughter was dead, Maya was looking at her living, breathing child. "Emma," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible through the cell door's communication slot. Emma looked up, and for a moment, Maya saw a flicker of recognition in her daughter's eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the careful blankness of someone who had learned that hope was dangerous. "I don't know you," Emma said, her voice flat and emotionless. Maya's heart shattered, but she forced herself to remain calm. "My name is Sarah. I'm here to help you." "They all say that," Emma replied, turning back to the wall. "But they always lie." Maya wanted to scream, wanted to tear the door off its hinges and gather her daughter in her arms. But she knew that any display of emotion would doom them both. Instead, she memorized every detail of Emma's appearance, noted the security measures around her cell, and began planning their escape. "I'm going to get you out of here," Maya said quietly. "I promise." Emma didn't respond, but Maya saw her shoulders tense slightly. Somewhere deep inside, her daughter was still fighting. Maya made it back to her patrol route just as Dr. Kane emerged from the children's wing. The doctor looked irritated by the various alarms and malfunctions, but she didn't seem suspicious of Maya's presence. That night, Maya activated the encrypted communication device that Agent Collins had given her. The message she sent was brief. "Package located. Requesting immediate extraction." The response came 12 hours later. "Extraction team en route. Maintain cover until contact." Maya spent the next 3 days in an agony of waiting. Every moment that passed was another moment that Emma remained in that cell. Another moment that the consortium's experiments continued. Maya had seen enough of the facility's research to know that they were developing new methods of psychological conditioning, ways to break a person's will so completely that they could be rebuilt into whatever their captors desired. Emma had been here for 3 years. Maya could only imagine what they had done to her daughter in that time. The extraction team made contact on Wednesday night. Maya was on perimeter patrol when she received a coded message on her radio. "Red Star 7, this is Guardian Angel. We are in position." Maya's heart leapt. Guardian Angel was the call sign for Delta Force extraction teams. Agent Collins had sent the best. "Guardian Angel, this is Red Star 7, Maya replied. "Package is located in Sector C, Cell 47. Heavy security, multiple checkpoints." "Copy that. Initiating diversion in 30 minutes. Be ready to move." Maya made her way toward the children's wing, using her security access to disable cameras and unlock doors along her route. She had one chance to get this right, one opportunity to save her daughter before the consortium realized what was happening. The diversion came in the form of explosions along the facility's eastern perimeter. The Delta Force team had brought enough firepower to level a small city, and they were using it to create the impression of a full-scale assault. Alarms blared throughout the facility as guards rushed to defend against an attack that was coming from the opposite direction. Maya reached the children's wing as the security lockdown began. The automated systems were sealing the facility, but Maya's access code still worked. She made it to Emma's cell just as the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the corridor in red light that made everything look like it was covered in blood. "Emma," Maya called through the communication slot. "It's Sarah. We're leaving. Now." Emma looked up, and this time Maya saw something different in her daughter's eyes. Not hope exactly, but a willingness to believe that escape might be possible. Maya used her security override to open the cell door. Emma stood up slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. She had learned to be cautious, to expect pain and disappointment. "Come with me," Maya said, extending her hand. Emma hesitated for a moment, then took it. Her fingers were cold and thin, but her grip was strong. They made it halfway to the exit before Dr. Kane appeared at the end of the corridor, flanked by 2 guards with automatic weapons. "Stop right there," Kane commanded, her voice cutting through the alarm noise. "Step away from the subject." Maya positioned herself between Kane and Emma, her hand moving instinctively toward the weapon she no longer carried. "Let us pass." Kane smiled, and it was the coldest expression Maya had ever seen. "I don't think so. You see, Ms. Mitchell, or should I say Red Star 7, we've been expecting you." Maya felt the world tilt around her. They knew. Somehow the consortium had known she was coming. "That's right," Kane continued. "Did you really think we wouldn't recognize you? Maya Chen, the ghost of Operation Crimson Dawn. We've been hunting you for 7 years. "Then you know what I'm capable of," Maya said, her voice deadly calm. "Indeed, which is why we took out an insurance policy." Kane nodded to one of the guards, who raised his weapon and aimed it directly at Emma. "One move, and your daughter dies." Maya felt Emma's hand tighten in hers. Her daughter was trembling, but she wasn't crying. 3 years in this place had taught her that tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. "What do you want?" Maya asked. "The same thing we've always wanted," Kane replied. "The location of the Crimson Dawn intelligence cache. Your team stole something very valuable from us 7 years ago, and we want it back." Maya's mind raced. The intelligence cache, she remembered now. Marcus Webb had downloaded terabytes of data from the target compound before the mission went wrong. Information about the consortium's operations, their clients, their methods. It was enough to destroy them completely. "I don't know where it is," Maya said. "But you know how to find it," Kane countered. "Webb gave you the access codes before he died. We know he did, because we've eliminated everyone else who might have had them." Maya understood now. The consortium hadn't just been hunting the survivors of Crimson Dawn for revenge. They had been hunting them for information, and they had used Emma as bait to draw Maya out of hiding. "The codes died with Marcus," Maya lied. Kane's smile widened. "Perhaps. But we have ways of refreshing your memory. The same techniques we've been using on your daughter." Maya felt rage building inside her like a nuclear reaction. They had been torturing Emma, using her own child as a test subject for their psychological experiments. "You're going to pay for that," Maya said, her voice carrying a promise of violence that made even the guards take a step back. "Am I?" Kane asked. "Because from where I'm standing, you're the one who's trapped. Your extraction team is pinned down outside, your daughter is at gunpoint, and you're outnumbered and outgunned." Maya was about to respond when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, but in that moment of darkness, Maya moved. She had spent years training for situations exactly like this, learning to fight in conditions where normal people would be helpless. She grabbed Emma and dove to the side just as the guards opened fire. Muzzle flashes lit up the corridor like strobe lights, and the sound of automatic weapons was deafening in the confined space. Maya rolled behind a concrete pillar, pulling Emma with her. Her daughter was shaking but unhurt, her eyes wide with terror and something that might have been hope. "Stay down," Maya whispered. Then she moved. The first guard never saw her coming. Maya emerged from cover like a shadow, her hands moving with lethal precision. She broke his neck before he could turn his weapon toward her, then took his rifle and used it to eliminate the second guard with a burst of automatic fire. Dr. Kane was reaching for her sidearm when Maya put 3 rounds center mass. The doctor collapsed against the wall, her cold eyes finally showing something like surprise. "Emma!" Maya called, extending her hand again. "We're leaving!" This time, Emma didn't hesitate. She ran to her mother, and Maya gathered her in her arms for the first time in 3 years. Emma was thin and fragile, but she was alive, and that was all that mattered. They made it to the facility's main exit, just as the Delta Force team breached the perimeter. The extraction was a textbook operation, fast, violent, and completely overwhelming. The consortium's guards were professional, but they weren't prepared for the kind of assault that the best soldiers in the world could deliver. Maya and Emma were evacuated by helicopter, lifted out of the nightmare facility, and carried towards safety. As they flew over the African landscape, Maya held her daughter close and whispered the words she had been waiting 3 years to say. "You're safe now. Mommy's here. You're safe." Emma didn't respond immediately, but Maya felt her daughter's arms tighten around her. Somewhere deep inside, The little girl who had been stolen and tortured and broken was still there, still fighting, still hoping. It would take time to heal the damage that had been done. Emma would need therapy, medical care, and years of patient love to overcome what she had endured. But she was alive, and she was free, and that was enough for now. The helicopter carried them toward a new life, toward a future that Maya had thought was lost forever. Behind them, Site 7 burned as the Delta Force team completed their mission, destroying the facility and eliminating every trace of the consortium's presence. But Maya knew the fight wasn't over. The consortium was a hydra, with operations around the world and resources that seemed limitless. They would rebuild, regroup, and continue their work of turning human beings into weapons and commodities. Maya looked down at the Crimson Star tattoo on her wrist, now visible again after months of hiding it beneath makeup and clothing. The ink seemed to pulse with renewed purpose, reminding her of the promise she had made and the debt that still needed to be paid. The consortium had taken 3 years of her daughter's life. They had tortured and experimented on a child who had done nothing wrong except be born to the wrong mother. They had killed Maya's teammates, destroyed her life, and made her believe her own daughter was dead. Some debts could never be forgiven. Some crimes could never be forgotten, and some people would never stop hunting until justice was served. Maya Chen had her daughter back, but the war was far from over. The Crimson Star on her wrist was more than just a tattoo. It was a promise written in blood and sealed with steel. A promise that the consortium would pay for what they had done, that every last member of their organization would face the consequences of their actions. The hunt would continue. But now Maya had something worth fighting for again. She had her daughter, her purpose, and her promise, and that was enough to change the world. Epilogue. 6 months later. Maya stood in the kitchen of a small house in rural Montana, watching Emma play in the backyard through the window. Her daughter was still fragile, still healing from the trauma she had endured. But she was making progress. The nightmares were less frequent now, and sometimes Maya even heard her laugh. The house was safe, protected by security measures that would make Fort Knox jealous. Agent Collins had kept her word. Emma was under federal protection, hidden away from the world while she recovered from her ordeal. Maya's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Another consortium facility had been located, this one in Eastern Europe. Another group of children who needed to be rescued. Another chance to strike back at the organization that had caused so much pain. Maya looked at the Crimson Star on her wrist, then at her daughter playing in the sunshine. Emma was safe now, protected and loved and free. But there were other children out there, other families that had been destroyed by the consortium's greed and cruelty. The war wasn't over. It might never be over. But Maya Chen, Red Star 7, was ready to fight it, one mission at a time, until every last member of the consortium was brought to justice. She kissed Emma goodbye, promised to be back soon, and walked out the door toward her next mission. The Crimson Star on her wrist caught the sunlight as she moved, a reminder of who she was and what she had sworn to do. Some promises were written in ink, others were written in blood. Maya Chen intended to keep them all,